Hey gang, Steve Borseti, Sandler Training. Hope you guys are all doing well, staying mentally strong during the dog days of summer. Challenging times usually for salespeople, but I would say for obvious reasons, more challenging this year than ever. Hang in there. We're going to get through this for sure. But today I wanted to share some tips, some thoughts with you on what I refer to as the big 6 rules of negotiating. And I know a lot of folks think of negotiating as this very specific art or craft that only a select few people become great negotiators. And it's just not true. There are some really simple rules we can follow to join that club, to become a really solid negotiator. And I always think that it's probably nothing more discouraging. You get to the end of a sales cycle and you've really done everything right with the prospect, and they tell you that you've won. But there's a gap, but they tell you there's a gap in price, terms, or conditions, and these days it's probably a lot of times around price, and they want to try to hammer you right at the end. So let me give you some simple rules, 6 simple rules that you can follow that will help you in a big way. Rule number 1: make sure there's an agreement in principle before we get brought into any negotiation. Prospects can be fairly slick at sucking you into a premature negotiation, and they're still playing somebody else out there as well. And it's a simple question. It's a very direct question, and it goes something like this. You say to the prospect, hey, Joe, listen, man, I appreciate the candor and you telling us that there's a gap here, but are you suggesting that if we can come to a meeting of the minds, if we really can come to an agreement and close this gap somehow, that we are, in fact, the company that you guys want to go with? Guys, that's a closed-ended question, and the negotiation begins only when you hear a yes to that. So that's rule number 1. Make sure you have an agreement in principle. Otherwise, you're still in the sales phase. We can talk about that another time. Rule number 2, make sure you convey that you are willing to walk away from this. If you say phrases to the prospect like, hey, Joe, let me go back on our end. Let me talk to my guys, see what we can do. If you do that huffy and puffy thing, like that you're totally committed that you're going to come back with something that will solve this, guys, you've lost all leverage in negotiating, for sure. So make sure you use phrases like, hey, Joe, I appreciate this, man. I definitely want to have the conversation with you. I'm not sure we're going to be able to pull this off. I'm not sure we're going to be able to close this gap, but let's at least have the conversation. Notice how I left a little bit of doubt in there for sure. So that's rule number 2. Rule number 3, guys, make sure you ask the prospect what they want. I know that sounds crazy and it sounds simple, but again, way too often salespeople go running back. We go running back to our office, to our leadership team. Hey, what can we do? We haven't even asked the damn prospect, what do they want from us? So ask them. It's fairly simple. Say to the prospect, say, hey, Joe, now that I understand that you're saying that our competition is at $100,000 and we're at $125,000, hey, what is it you were hoping we could do? Now, I know what everybody's big fear is to that. Well, what if they tell you that you got to match? What if they tell you got to be lower? Well, okay, you can always say no. But I will tell you this, folks, in my experience doing this for a long time, 30 plus years, in a lot more cases than you realize, the prospect's ask is way lighter than we think it's going to be. And if it's crazy, you just say no. So there's that. Rule number 4, make sure you figure out what the real gap is. And what I mean by that is when a prospect tells you that your competition is at $100,000 and you're at $125,000, instantly most people say, "Ooh, the gap is $25,000." Well, no, it's not, and here's why: they're talking to you. See, if the other guys was who they really wanted to go with in the first place, and the gap was $25,000, well, guess what? You wouldn't even be having this conversation. They already would have pulled the trigger with the other guy. My point is, they want to work with you. Otherwise, they wouldn't be talking to you. So there's probably, almost always, some premium they're willing to live with. So that's why we want to try to figure out what the real gap is. And you do that with a simple question as well. Hey, so Joe, you said that the competition is at 100 and we're at 125, but clearly you seem to like what we've said and you really would like to work with us. You said as much. Hey, so what do you think? What needs to happen here? And oftentimes you'll hear from the prospect, well, listen, Steve, you don't need to match, but man, if you guys could at least do X, and let's figure out what the X is. So now you have the real gap. That's what I mean by finding out the real gap. Rule number 5, introduce as many non-monetary points of negotiating as you can. Everybody gets fixated on price for sure, but there could be payment terms you're willing to negotiate. There could be different kinds of buying options that you have for a prospect, buying, in some cases, even leasing options that I know some clients we work with have. But also there may be things like training, there may be things like installation, there may be timing of implementation, a lot of different things. Get as many of those on the table as you can for discussion. Don't have it be focused 100% on price. So see if you can get those into the mix. And then guys, last rule number 6, slow the F down. And I know, and I'm probably talking to mostly to my VP of sales friends and my SVPs and my CEOs, we're always in a rush to get these deals across the finish line. And I am not suggesting we draw something out. I know you're saying, oh, time kills deals. Yeah, I got it. But let's not immediately in that phone call feel like we have to solve for this. There's nothing wrong with telling a prospect, hey, Joe, Mr. Prospect, Ms. Prospect, let me go back and think this through on my side. Let us go back and see if we can come up with some ideas that help with this. Okay? Let's us, for once, the salesperson, let us be the one that wants to go back and sleep on something and think about it, think it over. And make sure you do this, guys. Do not, if you're the account executive leading the charge on this thing, do not use the let me go back and talk to my boss. I want you to maintain your own authority in this, okay? You might have to work with these folks again in the future, and it's just good practice for your own personal skill set. Say to the prospect, let me go back and think this thing through. Let me go back and take a look. Now that I understand what the gap is and what we're trying to solve for here, let me do this. Not, oh, I got to go talk to my boss. If you do that, guys, it's grovelly. And guess what? The prospect at some point may not even want to talk to you anymore. They may just say, hey, just give me your boss. Anyhow, guys, the big 6 rules of negotiating. Just follow those 6 principles, and I'm telling you, it'll save you a lot of anxiety, a lot of grief in your sales life. Until next time, remember, folks, first they have to buy you, then they buy your company, and then they buy your product or service. See you next time. Talk to you soon.